As realtors, we help our clients with all sorts of matters, including how to find available resources that may assist with the down payment. We are proud to announce that Down Payment Resource is now available on HAR.com. This will allow consumers to find out if they meet the criteria for any of the 70 different assistance programs available in the greater Houston region. Some programs are income-based, but many allow higher incomes than you may think. There are also programs specific for people in certain professions, such as police officers, firefighters, teachers, healthcare workers, and others. About 89% of all listings for sale in Houston qualify for some sort of down payment. To find out more, you may visit www.har.com/down payment and work with your realtor to make sure you have everything you need to be able to purchase the home of your dreams.
This is Bill Baldwin of Boulevard Realty. Hurricane season starts June 1 and runs through November 30th. This is a reminder of the importance of having flood insurance both as a homeowner and as a renter. Every property should be covered by flood insurance. Historically, 40% of all flood insurance claims are for properties outside the high-risk areas. Flood insurance policies have a 30-day waiting period before they go into effect. Typical homeowner insurance and rental insurance will not cover flood damage caused by rising water. It's also good to know existing flood policies can only increase up to 18% per year and can often be assumed by new owners if selling or buying. However, if the policies lapse, you are often subject to significantly higher premiums. In summary, flooding in Houston and Harris County is very common. Be prepared.
Good afternoon and welcome to HAR Community Conversations. I'm Christina Schaefer, Director of Social Media and Sponsorships for HAR. And again, welcome to HAR's Community Conversations. We're here every month having meaningful conversations about the topics that matter most to Houstonians. Today we're continuing our home buying series from renting to home buying with Jeremy Benefiel of RedStar Inspection. Welcome to the program, Jeremy.
Hey guys, how you doing? Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really looking forward to this.
Yeah, this is going to be a really great conversation. I just know it because there's so many questions around inspections, and as a home buyer myself, I know there was questions I had, or even back when I was a first-time home buyer, I know there are so many questions to be had, so I'm glad you could take time to join us today.
Oh, believe me, yeah, there is a lot of questions. I know we get it a lot.
Absolutely. Well, Jeremy, let's get started. Tell us a bit about your background and your experience inspecting homes in the Houston area.
Okay. Well, a lot of people don't know this about me. I was a captain for Houston Fire Department for 24 years. So when you become a firefighter, you have to know construction because your life depends on it. Give you an example, you have to know what a structured roof is made of. Because if we get up on a roof and we don't know what it is, let's say it's a truss structure, that could cost our lives. So that's one thing I've gained knowledge from doing that. And so when I became a firefighter, learned that construction, all firemen have to have side jobs somehow, some way. And a realtor friend of mine brought it up, said, hey, you should do that for a side job. And I thought about it and I was like, oh, that seems interesting. And so I went to school to become a home inspector, did all that. And when I got my license, I was like, all right, I'm here, I'm ready to work. And it was really tough that first year. I mean, I hardly had anything. And what the amazing thing that happened to me was when I was about a year into it, I was like, you know what, I don't think this is working out for me. I'm just not getting that many calls because realtors aren't going to use you if they don't know your work or if you don't have much experience. And then right when I made that decision, my phone immediately rang. And they said, hey, can you do an inspection, tomorrow, da-da-da. And I'm like, okay, yeah, sure. I need the money. It sounds great, So I did the inspection and I went from that to like, oh, I'm doing 1 a week, 2 a week, 3 a week, 4 a week. And then out of nowhere, I'm doing 3 a day. And that was extremely difficult for the fire department because I would do 24 on and I would only get an hour or two of sleep. And then I did 3 in a day. So that, which now I thought is crazy. I don't even know how I pulled that off. And then I would go to do another 24-hour shift, get hardly any sleep, and then I'd be doing inspections again. I did that for about 5 years, and this is kind of a funny story, but at the 5-year mark when it was just me, all of a sudden I was going to do an inspection, and all of a sudden I got like a twitch. I was like, I can't do this anymore. I was working 7 days a week. It was like, it was nuts. And so once I'm sorry, let me backtrack. When I was at that house, I had to call my wife and said, I can't do this. I just feel like ripping my clothes off and running down the street. I can't handle this anymore. And so on the phone, she had to help me get through that inspection because I was just so burned out. And then after that, I ended up hiring somebody, and I was wondering why didn't I do that a long time ago? And that's when it really took off for me, is when I hired somebody. The hardest part of it was a year after that. Everybody just wanted me. They didn't want my new employee. But then once we went down that path and we started doing that, after a couple of years, they're like, Jeremy who? So we kept building and adding. And so it was a difficult transition. But after that, it was great. So that's
what a fun backstory. Yeah, thank you so much. And I love to hear that your experience from firefighting for over 24 years at that point, really stepped into play there. Well, let's talk about home inspection and what this means for home buyers. Why is home inspection such a critical step for home buyers?
Well, it's going to be one of your most important, your biggest purchase in your life, most people. So that's extremely important. It'd be crazy just to buy a home not seen and go in there and all of a sudden you have $100,000 worth of issues. So that is extremely important to have that done.
So now what exactly does a home inspector evaluate during a typical home inspection?
So what it is, there's 5 main components. You have structural, electrical, AC and heating, and appliances, and plumbing. And so what it does is instead of hiring all those professions, like the contractor comes see the structure to an electrician or a plumber, you don't need to do that. And that's why you hire us, is we go out there and we evaluate. And it's mainly a visual inspection that we're doing. And when we do that, we're finding, okay, there's possible issues with the electric here and plumbing, and everything else that what we've looked at is fine. So then all you have to do is hire those 2 contractors instead of hiring everybody at once.
Yeah, that makes sense. And how long do inspections usually take? And also, should buyers attend inspections?
Well, inspections really, it depends on the home. So you could have a home that may take 2 to 3 hours. It's not that bad. We're only finding a few issues. You could have another home the exact same size that we're there for 5 hours. So it all depends on the home, on it. It seems like the harder ones for us are usually the 20, 30-year-old homes, 20 years, because everything starts to go out. And so that's when we're discovering a whole lot of little details that we're having to put in the report.
So is that pretty common? The older the home, the longer the inspection, or
well, it depends.
is that,
You could have a 50-year-old home that has gone through. You got a new roof, new AC, electricity's, and all that. So it's way easier. So it's kind of like it's that little middle point where things are starting to go out. It seems like it's the hardest for us.
So once buyers inspection is done, they receive that inspection report. What are their next steps after that?
So the best thing is read it. So a lot of times, let's say if it's a 60-page, 80-page report, some people look at this and like, I don't know what to do with this, and they just give it to their realtor. So, and that it's, the realtor's there to help you, but sometimes there might be something important in that report the buyer wanted and the realtor didn't realize it. So that's why, and I think one of your questions coming up is we really encourage the buyer to be there, to communicate. When the buyer's there, especially at the end, we can sit down with them, we can go over the whole report and tell them, hey, this is exactly what's wrong, and they have questions, and then we can walk around in some areas. So yeah, this area I found moisture penetration. We can use a thermal imager and show it. I think that's the biggest thing, is just to be there. But then on the other side of that is sometimes we get buyers that come from the very beginning, which we don't have a problem with, but they'll want to follow you and they're asking questions nonstop. And so what that does is it distracts the inspector. So the inspector's trying to do his job, and he's keeps answering the client's questions, and all of a sudden he skips a whole section and didn't even realize it. So that's, really, a big thing on that. And then this was another one, since we're talking about it, is for first home buyers, we get sometimes the dad will show up and he knows everything. And so that's really tough on us too. So, because then he'll follow us around, distract the inspector again. But I definitely recommend just at the very end they come, even halfway through, and then we can communicate with them. Because there's times when you do a report, let's say they barely look at it, they didn't show up, and then when that happens, they move in and they're like, man, you missed all this stuff. We're like, no, it was in the inspection report. And so they didn't even realize it. So that's why communication is so important.
Okay, so tail end of the inspection, show up, talk about the report. When you have questions, just don't distract the inspector so they can do their job. That makes perfect sense. So what are some, go ahead.
And one other thing, and that's why we do the virtual reality inspection report. So we, with HAR, when y'all advertise, when you have a listing, you travel through a 3D home, that's part of our inspection report too. And so that's been beneficial for us. So when we do an inspection like that, let's say it's an out-of-state buyer, we'll do videos within that report. And so they feel like they're there. And so that's a huge help on the communication part on that.
Yeah. That's wonderful. So what are the most common red flags that you find in homes here in the Houston area?
I would say drainage is huge. And it kind of goes on another question that you were going to ask was about the weather. So with drainage is everything for a foundation. So you might think like a corner of the structure, the drainage is not done properly. But you're thinking, oh, it's not a big deal, or there's trees next to the foundation, that's not a big deal. And then what happens is when it rains, just like Houston, we get a lot of rain, it'll affect that soil beneath that foundation, and guess what? It's going to start moving. Or let's say you have trees next to your foundation, well, that water's pooling and going underneath their foundation. Where do you think the roots are going? The roots are going where the water's at. So that's why that's important on that part. And then other stuff is like roofs, red flags. I mean, everything, the major thing, like here from the rains, the roof is very important. So that's, that's a major issue there if you're finding a lot of leaks or your granulas are destroyed. So there's a whole lot of things that we can find that way as well. But that's just a small list. There's a whole bunch of red flags.
So what are some other things that maybe they come back on the inspection report, they might seem minor, but could turn into major problems later down the road?
Like the minor, let's say AC system. Let's say you never, so a lot of it could be just like maintenance things. And let's say you never change your filter, you never get it serviced. You're thinking, that's no big deal. In the end, it will be. But if you get it serviced once a year, make sure every 3 months you're changing out your filters, or you may need to even do that some more. Like all the time when we inspect, you would be surprised these filters. They look like they haven't been replaced in 4 years. I mean, it is bad. So,
yeah.
A little thing like that could go a long way.
Okay.
And then let's say water heater, another thing. Let's say you need to drain your water heater annually, and if you don't do that, you're going to, you could have a water heater last 10, 15 years, but if you don't do that, it could, it shortens the life of it.
We also had our inspector mention the dryer vent, that it was ready to cause a fire hazard. You have thoughts there?
Oh yeah, and I've had a lot of fire. When I was a firefighter, yes, had a lot of fires. And the worst ones were because they didn't take care of that, and let's say they were running the dryer at like 1, 2 in the morning, and it catches fires. And we've had that many times before, and we're having to evacuate the family and everything because they never cleaned it out. So yes, that's a huge hazard.
Okay, thank you for that. A couple comments came in that I wanted to take a look at. Claudia just mentioned in regard to what we were talking about, the drainage. She said recently had to terminate a contract because drainage caused an issue the day of closing. So yes, very important. Jose said, I'm a seller's agent and some buyer's agents send the inspection report and request that old properties be brought up to current codes. Is that something that you see frequently?
Well, I mean, some of them are grandfathered in. I mean, unfortunately, as an inspector, I mean, we're required by TREC to put some things in the report, even if it's grandfathered in. But if you have a good inspector, they're going to communicate that with you. Because some inspectors will put that in there like it's fact and it needs to be done right now. But the best thing on that is you just need to talk to your inspector, and he'll tell you, like, yeah, we recommend it, but it's not required.
Okay. So, again, looking for your insight here, how should buyers evaluate what issues are worth negotiating and discussing and maybe, discussing price on, or just completely walking away from the property on?
Well, I mean, that's a good question. So like our report system, we have a maintenance, we have recommended and hazard. So like, let's say we're doing an inspection and a lot of it's maintenance issues. That's a lot of times not a thing to, walk away from. But we do have buyers that are like that. There's a lot of cosmetic things that we find, and then that just isn't enough. But like, especially with new home buyers, and then we have to really sit down and talk with them. Hey, that's not really, I mean, you need to get this done, like a honey-do list, but the recommended, what we have, and the hazards are the most important. And we've even had a great inspection where there's not many things we found, and there were needed GFCI outlets within the kitchen, and that was enough for them to freak out and walk away, which is not necessary because outlets are $15-$20 and you need 3 of them. I mean, it's not really enough to walk away from, But then there's stuff like, if you see bad drainage and you notice the foundation is already moving a lot, I mean, that's pretty serious to take. Because it's always the major things. It's going to be your foundation, or is it your roof, or hey, your AC system's working, but hey, 15, it's 20 years old, let's say. It's working, but you got a budget for that in the future. Or a water heater is 10 years old. You got a budget for that. So you can still have a good inspection report, but then you have to look at the, later on, like, hey, a year from now, what are going to be my costs?
Okay, very good. So you already kind of mentioned how Houston's soil and weather impact the foundation. What about other structural integrity issues? Is there any other concerns or worries there in regard to our soil and weather?
It's mainly from the heavy rains and if it's not draining properly. But there's time when I was doing inspections. There was a neighborhood up north that they built a subdivision. Originally it was full of trees, and they went and wiped out all those trees and then put new soil. And guess what happens? It's been hundreds of years, trees there with that soil. Now it's unstable, and so that whole neighborhood had issues, with foundation, all of them. So it's due diligence to see, like, okay, if you move into a new neighborhood, maybe see like what's the history of that and how it was built, and things like that. So.
Okay, that makes sense. So what if any are previous signs of flood damage that a buyer should look out for? Because obviously flood is a big concern in Houston, and buyers are looking for properties and they want to know flood history. Are there signs of previous flood damage when you're going to look at as an inspector?
Yes and no. I mean, it's difficult, especially if they remodeled the structure. It's very, very difficult for us to find. One little trick that we have is where your filter is, you'll return air. So if it's at the ground floor, a lot of times they won't repair that. So when we pull away, open it up and look in, there are sometimes some signs of water damage. Another thing is it's very difficult too. It's like, with thermal imaging, a lot of people think that we could see that with a thermal camera, but it has to be a temperature change to be able to see it. So if it's old, even if we look at with the camera, we're not going to be able to tell, if it's dry or, if it's wet, or I'm sorry, if there's mold behind the walls or anything, because we just can't see through that. So it has to be active at the time. So yes, it's very difficult for us to see that. So that's where your realtor is so important on that. You have to look at the disclosure, and if there's nothing on that, and then you can Google and say, hey, has there been a history of flood in this neighborhood? You'll have to do some research on that to see.
Yeah, very good.
And then that's where like it'd be important if you knew, let's say the disclosure has it, and where it's within that report. But we can't find anything. That's when you need a mold inspection. That's what I would recommend.
Okay, very good. Are there concerns with older homes in Houston, like with cast iron pipes or outdated wiring?
Yes, it's getting less and less because, that was 40, 50 years ago. So we don't come across it as much, but we do. So the cast iron, goes from the house to the street. And so we recommend no matter what, if we know it's cast iron, do a sewer scope. I mean, we're going to be able to tell right away. So we're going to put that scope down there, and we'll be able to see on that. One thing with the electrical wiring, we do come across the old, new, tube and knob, electricity and older wiring system, but a lot of them are updated. But what we come across is it's supposed to be disconnected, and we always inspect, make sure it's not live. And there's been times it's live, and it's supposed to be completely disconnected. So whenever we see older wiring that's still not in use, we do recommend an electrician to come out just to double check, because, like I said, a lot of times they don't disconnect them. So.
Okay. Very good. So you kind of answered part of my next question, but I'm curious if there's more, because I wanted to know, are there additional inspections that a buyer should consider, like termites or sewer, and when should they consider those? Is it after the initial inspection?
Yeah, so termite, like if you have an inspection company, we're all termite certified. So yes, we definitely recommend having a termite, because we see that all the time. With inspections. And we even see it surprisingly every so often with new construction. It's pretty shocking sometimes to be able to, it's a brand new home and there's termites. So that's very important. And then sewer scope, I brought that up earlier about how important that is. Like new construction, that's extremely important, because a lot of times there's Coke cans down there, beer cans, or whatever, or it's cracked when they fill the dirt back in. So you could be buying a new home and then you already have an issue with your drain. So that's a big issue. One thing I do, speaking of when we talked about mold, mold is, what we recommend is you inspect first the house. Then if there's areas that we know, like, hey, the kitchen could be an issue, maybe the master, then get a mold company out, because then they can isolate it into those areas. Because not many people know that when you get a mold inspection, they're doing air samples in only a few rooms. So you might miss that. So that's why it's important to do the inspection first, and then he can figure, okay, well, hey, I want you to target these areas, so you can isolate and figure it out. Because most of the time people get the mold at the same time as an inspection, but I don't recommend that.
Okay. Well, I think you just answered my next question, which was about new construction homes. So I would think, as a buyer, maybe you're a first-time home buyer, it's a brand new home. Why do I need an inspection? Tell us, Jeremy, why do you need an inspection on a new construction home?
Yeah, and that's important too. I answered the sewer scope part, but you wouldn't believe, like, I did an inspection one time where I had 2 homes back to back, brand new homes, same builder, but we found out there were different contractors doing each one. One was great. We only found, I only found a few problems. Next one was practically falling down. So it's extremely important. And this was a high-end builder too, so you just don't know. So sometimes we go out there and there's not much, and sometimes there's a lot. But if you think about it, let's say maybe it's $5,000 worth of stuff that they didn't do and you don't know anything about it, and then you go to sell your home 5 years from now, 10 years from now, guess who's holding the bag? Because when you get inspected, they're going to say, hey, this was never done. And then all of a sudden you have to make up the difference for if the buyer requests that $5,000 of work that needs to be done. So that's why it's so important to get that done. And that's why we recommend phase inspections. So like with new construction, you have before you pour the concrete, you have that inspection. When it's just the wood members up the frame, you have that inspection. Make sure they have done it properly. And then the third, final one. And then usually when you have all 3 of those, you're in good shape. Everything's done properly.
Great, thank you. If you have questions for Jeremy, please type those in and we will be taking a look at them. We actually had one that came in from Rhonda. She was asking, is it common to look for fire damage in an inspection?
Yeah, and that's pretty obvious. And usually you can see that in the attic space, because a lot of times they don't do anything in the attic space, so that's pretty obvious. But I've had times, and my guys have had times, you go up there and they try to cover it and hide it and paint it. But it's pretty easy to see on that. And then kind of like going to another subject real quick. Another thing is, like, when you have a home that's being remodeled, and let's say it had foundation problems, and then they flipped it, and what we do is the first thing we can see is, like, when they put heavy texture on the ceilings and walls and all that, like they're trying to hide cracks within the ceiling, and then they replace windows and stuff, so you can't tell there's a foundation issue. But the first thing we do is we go straight up the attic and look, and they fix everything except the wood structure, the structure. And a lot of times the rafter on the ridge boards will be pulling off, crack, twisting, and we know that there's been a whole lot of movement. So that's a little trick that we have. We can tell, like, a structure's been flipped. We can go up there and see, oh, yep, there was an issue. Because they never fix that.
Very good. So are there common misconceptions that buyers have regarding what an inspection includes? Or you've mentioned some of the things it includes, but are there misconceptions around what it includes or doesn't include?
Yes, that is huge, because some buyers think we do exhaustive inspection. If we did that, we'd be there for a week. And then Trek won't even allow us to do it. So that's that's the biggest thing, like with new buyers, is they think that let's say we're inspecting an AC system, we can only do so much. And we're not allowed to take it apart and look in there and see what other issues we can find. It's just a general scope of the house. And then we've been trained a certain way where we can hopefully discover some of those issues visually. And when we do that, then we can say, hey, there's an issue with your AC, there's an issue with your electrical panel. Let's dive into it deeper. And let's say we find some issues with the electrical, but it's something else was hidden. The misconception is that they think, well, you should have, caught that too. But no, we can't do exhaustive. At least we found these other ones. So then you hire the electrician to, dive deeper into it and then find those issues. Yeah.
Makes sense. Very good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, Jeremy, this has been really helpful. Not seeing any other questions coming in, but if somebody has a question, type it in. Now is the time. I'm curious, though, as an inspector, as somebody who's seen, I'm sure, a wide variety of things in different properties, what piece of advice would you give to a buyer, specifically a first-time home buyer, that's heading into their inspection?
Well, just kind of like what we talked about before, communication is everything. So, like I said, we recommend you go into the inspection um, and really read that report. I know sometimes it's tough, and then don't be afraid. Our inspectors are always available. You can call them anytime you want and go over. Hey, what does this mean? I'm confused about this, and like, hey, is this important? Is this not important? So that's where a good inspector can help guide you instead of, because that's one thing great about, like, if you have experienced inspectors, that's very important, because let's say you're new to the game, being an inspector, sometimes you're not sure about things, so you could scare a buyer and stuff that's not really that important. But a good experienced inspector can say, hey, no, I know this is a concern, but let's worry about all this stuff. That's the biggest thing, is communicating with your home inspector.
Well, that makes perfect sense. Thank you so much for everything you've shared today. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with our audience today?
No, I don't have anything else. Just appreciate you having me.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again so much for your time and sharing your expertise with us as well, Jeremy. We truly appreciate it. And that is it for this month's HAR Community Conversations. We will be back next month, so be sure to tune in. Actually, I do apologize. We have one question that just rolled in at the last second that I want to take a look at. What should we look for when choosing the right inspector? What a great question.
Oh, that is a good question. Okay, one of the things at first is experience. That's very important. Equipment. One thing, when I was inspecting, I didn't have a zip level. And what a zip level is measuring your foundation. And I always had to guess, like, use the forces, like, oh, I think there's a problem, and, because there's signs of cracking brick on the outside to cracking wall, cracks in the ceilings to windows and doors not opening and closing properly. And I would recommend a structural engineer. And then what would happen is they would come out, for $1,000 or whatever they're charging, and say, oh, there's not a problem. And I always felt bad about that. I was like, what a waste of money that I, had my client do for no reason. So a zip level is extremely important, because they can do measurements, and then there's a problem or there's not a problem. There's no question. So it's very easy on that. And then also to help protect you, when we have the numbers of the foundation and then they do want to get their foundation repaired, it keeps the foundation company honest, because they know we already did it. So
very good.
I would say the equipment and experience is the most important thing.
Sounds great. Thank you so much, Jeremy, and thank you for that final question from our audience. Again, that's it for this month's HAR Community Conversations. We'll be back next month, so be sure to tune in then. Have a great week, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.